In the previous video, we started our discussion about operators in Java. And in this video, we want to go through and finish off that discussion by introducing you to some additional operators. Now, in case you're wondering why the color on the screen has changed since the last video, the reason is that I'm re-recording this video, and that's because there were a couple of issues with the original recording. So hence, it's an updated version of IntelliJ, and it's now done in this color because I'm doing that in the later parts of this course because it's proven to be better for the eyes in this particular color. Okay, so moving on. So if you recall, we actually finished off talking about the AND operator, and you can see an example of the AND operator on line 55, checking to see whether both conditions were true. So both what was on the left-hand side of the AND, the two ampersands, and also what's on the right-hand side, and we'd only get the output showing on line 56 if both conditions were actually true. Now, what I suggest you do is in the case where you've got these two checks, these two conditions, it's a good idea to actually put a bracket around each set of conditions, like so. And you don't have to do that. There are some issues with operator precedence, but we'll talk about that later. But it does make your code easier and more unambiguous because what you're doing, it's pretty clear there that the test is now, for this part here, that's the first condition in brackets, and here's the second condition in brackets. Now you can see if we run it, we'll still get the same output that we got previously. You got the high score, but it's just a lot clearer what's actually going on using brackets. So I do suggest where possible with conditions, it's a good idea to put brackets around it just to clarify. Okay, moving on to the next operator. And what we're going to do is talk about the OR operator. Now the AND operator, again, both conditions with the AND operator have to be true, but with the OR operator, only one of the conditions need to be true. So let's type some code to clarify that. So I can put if, I'm going to use the two brackets that we talked about. So if top score in brackets is greater than 90, surround that with brackets. I'm using the OR, which is the two pipe characters, and you need to do two. A common error is to use only one. One is actually valid, but it's not an OR. You'll get a completely different result. And that's the same with the AND actually. You can have one ampersand, but that will give you a different result. So make sure you are using two, because that's actually the AND, the correct AND operator, and this is the correct OR operator. So moving on, our test firstly is to see whether top score is greater than 90, or let's also do a test for second top score is less than or equal to 90. And then I'll do a S out. Now, by the way, I'm not sure whether I've shown you that before, but if you type S out, as I have there, and then press Tab, you notice how IntelliJ changes that for you and saves us a bit of typing. But one of these tests is true. So you can see what we've done there. We've said if top score is greater than 90, or if the second top score is less than or equal to 90, then output it. So if we run this, we should find that it does output, because in this example, firstly on line 50, top score is 80, so that's false. But if we look at the assignment on line 54, second top score is less than or equal to 90 because we've assigned 81 to that, so that's true. So because the second condition is true, we should get the output showing on the screen. And you can see that we have got just that, one of these tests is true. So if I change this, let's just make the second top score 95. So we've now got the scenario where on line 50, top score is 80. So this first condition is false. And on line 54, second top score is 95. So the second condition is false. So therefore, false or false. And we have to have at least one true. So this now should not show that message. So if we run this again, one of these tests is true, should not be printed. And you can see that's the case. So that's what the OR operator does. So I'm just going to undo that and set that back to the original value. Okay, so moving on. A couple of little challenges here for you just to try and figure out. So let's just start off with typing int new value equals 50. Then we're going to do a test for if the new value equals 50. I'm going to do the S out tab. This is an error. Now you've noticed there that IntelliJ is underlining that and saying, confusingly, incompatible types, required boolean found int. But looking at that, you think, well, aren't we testing to see whether the new value is equal to 50? That 50 has been typed there. That's the correct variable name. Well, what we've done there is we've only used the one equal sign, remembering that the one equal sign is an assignment. So that's setting the value of what's on the left-hand side to the value of 50, which is on the right-hand side. So in this case, that's setting the value of 50 to new value. or new value, I should say, to the value of 50. So we need to, if we want to test the value, if it's equal to, we need to put the two equal signs. And by doing that, you can see that the error then disappears, and we can change this now because it's no longer an error. And but this is true. So if we run that, this is true is showing. Whereas when we had just the one equal sign, of course, we couldn't even run it because we actually had an error. So if we tried to run that, we'll actually get an error. Int cannot be converted to Boolean, and that's because we were trying to assign it rather than set the value. So that's the equals. So, but that's fine. So that helped, IntelliJ helped us there, and it actually gave us the error, and we were able to fix it because we weren't able to get the code running until that fix was made. But there's another scenario that can trip you up, and that's using Boolean. So if we type Boolean is car is equal to false, and then if we type if is car equals true, then we use our S out to display a message, and we'll put this is not supposed to happen. Because again, at face value, you'd think, well, okay, we've assigned false to our Boolean is car on line 65. And looking quickly at line 66, you say, well, we're checking to see whether is car equals true. So surely that should fail because is car is false. But if we run this, we get this is not supposed to happen. And you might be wondering, well, two things here. Firstly, why is that happening? But secondly, we didn't get an error like we did when we did the assignment on line 62. So the reason for that is when you actually make an assignment of a value, any value, what is returned is whatever the assignment was. So in other words, in the case here of new value equals 50, if we do it, set that back to one equal sign, as an expression, that returns whatever new value was assigned to. So in other words, that would be returned as 50 if we're actually checking that condition. Now in this particular case, we got an error because when we're doing an if comparison, of course, we need a Boolean to be able to determine whether it's true or false. So that's why IntelliJ was able to tell us there was an error. But in the second scenario, we're dealing with a Boolean already, and we're assigning the value of true to this Boolean by only using the one equal sign, and consequently the line of code actually works. So that can be one to trip you up with Booleans, so make sure you do your two equal signs to avoid that error. So now if we put is car equals true with the two correct equal signs, we run that, we won't get that message showing anymore. The message is no longer showing, and the reason for that, of course, is because we've correctly done an equals test instead of trying to do a comparison test. And obviously in that scenario, another way to avoid that with a Boolean would be to just change this and put if is car, because by default, that is not even putting the equal signs and you're not going to get into difficulty, and that saves you a bit of code. Is car will return whatever the value of the variable it is. In this case, it'll return false because we've assigned that on line 65. So if we run that, again, we shouldn't get an error, and we shouldn't get that output, and we haven't got that, so that's good. The last operator to discuss is the ternary operator. Now this is a way to set a value based on two conditions. So it sounds a bit confusing, but let's actually type it out and then we'll explain it and talk through it. So we'll type Boolean was car equals is car true false. So this is the format of a ternary operator. So basically it's saying if is car is evaluated to true, that's the expression before the question mark. So we're saying is car, this is the value that it's looking for, question mark, is it true? If so, we're going to return true, and the colon is the sort of like an otherwise return false. So again, what we're saying here, basically this code is a shortcut for saying if is car is equal true, then was car equals true, else was car equals false. So we're assigning that value based on whether is car is true or false. Sounds a little bit confusing, but let's just run it just to confirm. And what we'll do is we'll put some code here. Let's actually put an if there. If was car, use our S out again, was car is equal to true, or is true. So if you run that first, we should find that it doesn't work because of course we've assigned on line 65 is car to false. So if we run that, we haven't got a was car is true there, so that's correct. But if we change this now, and we'll put here is car equals true. So I've assigned that to true. So now what we're saying is Boolean is equal to the checking the value of is car. If it's true, it's going to return true. Otherwise, it's going to return a false. So now was car should be equal to true because of that. And if we run that, we should get the message was car is true. So let's run that. was car equals or is true. So there you go, that's the ternary operator. And again, that's just a bit of a shortcut, but you will see that in Java code. So it's a good thing to actually have knowledge under your belt. Okay, next I want to just go and show you a list of operators from the Oracle website. So we're going to open a browser and paste this in. And the link is in the resources section. You see the link up here. And just let me check this. Nuts and bolts. Op summary Oracle. Just do a search for that. That's the one there. Not sure what happened there, but this is a handy list because it offers a summary of all the operators. Again, this link will be available in the resources section. So some of the operators have been discussed. You can see a lot of those have been discussed, and some of them haven't been though. Some of them, for example, the instance of operator. We'll be talking about that later in the course. That's more at an advanced thing when we're dealing with classes, and we're not at that stage of the course yet. But the ones down here also, the bitwise and bit shift operators, we'll tackle those when and if needed, but it's fairly rare that you'll be using those. And if you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned you need to be careful about using a single ampersand and a single pipe character when you're thinking that you're using the AND. So you can see there that uses a bitwise AND with a single ampersand and a bitwise inclusive OR for a single pipe character. That's why you need to make sure that you type them, these ones here, correctly, so you're getting the right results. Okay, so it's time now for a challenge. So let's go and create that back in IntelliJ and see what you can come up with. Okay, so here is the challenge. Firstly, create a double variable with the value of 20. Then create a second variable of type double with the value of 80. You want to add both numbers up and multiply the result by 25. And you need to then use the remainder operator, which we talked about in the previous video, to figure out what the remainder is from the sum that was calculated in step 3 divided by 40. And of course, that's what the remainder does. And number 5, step 5, write an if statement that displays a message saying total was over the limit if the remaining total, which was basically using the result of using the remainder operator in step 4, is equal to 20 or less. So go away and do that. Pause the video now, and when you're finished, you want to come back and compare your results to mine. Start the video then. So pause the video now. Okay, so how did you get on? Hopefully you figured it out. So let's now go through my version of the code. So I'm going to start firstly on step 1, create a double variable with the value of 20. So I can type double, and we'll put my first value equals 20. Now obviously I can optionally put D there. I don't have to put D there because in the expression, Java can figure out that we meant a double. So that's optional if you put that. And we'll put double, my second value is equal to 80. Give it a space here. Now, next on line 3, we need to add both numbers up. That's the two numbers from steps 1 and 2 and multiply by 25. So let's try and type double my first total. I'll just put my total equals, that's my first value, plus my second value multiplied by 25. Okay, step 4, use the remainder operator to figure out the remainder from the sum of 3 divided by 40. So basically that's you're not having to redivide it again by 40. What we're trying to do is use that remainder. So to do that, we're going to put double the remainder. This could be an int, by the way, but we're purposely doing it as a double because we're talking about doubles here. But an int would be fine. Equals my total and getting the remainder from 40. Remainder 40 like so. And then we're going to put if the remainder, this is the fifth step, write an if statement that displays the message total is over the limit if the remaining total is less than or is equal to 20 or less. So we're going to put if it's less than or equal to 20, and S out, press a tab, and we're going to put total was over the limit. So that's the first cut of our code. So let's actually try running that. Total was over the limit. So what we need to do is just try and go through this step by step. So what we'll do is we'll actually do some outputting here. Let's on this first line here, I'm just going to put an output, and we'll put my total equals and my total. So we're just going to display that to the screen. So you'd think there in theory, my first value plus my second value, so that's 100 times 25 should be 2,500. So if we run that, now you can see here we've got a weird result here. We've got my total is 2,020. So that's actually a problem. Even though ultimately the last step has worked, we're getting a weird value here. So why are we getting that value? Well, this has got to do with operator precedence. So what's happening is the order that Java is going through to calculate these codes are different. So what we really wanted it to do was add the two values up first, my first value and my second value, and then multiply the result by 25. But in actual fact, what's happening is because we've used the multiplication, that's got a higher priority, more higher precedence, and that's been evaluated first. So what's actually happening is we're getting 80 times 25 first. So if we have a look at that. So 80 times 25 is 2,000 plus 20 has been added to it. So that's where we're getting the 2020. So what we actually need to do here to clarify this is why brackets are a good idea. We need to tell Java, calculate that first, and then multiply the result by 25. So that should give us 2,500. So let's go ahead and do that. We've now correctly got the 2,500. Now the remainder, but basically what's left over, we're dividing 2,500 effectively by 40. So that should give us a remainder. So if we have a look at the calculator, how many times does 40 go into 2,500? So it's 2,500 divided by 40. That gives us 62. So 62 times, so we can do 62 times 40. That gives us 2,480. So therefore, if the remainder is less than or equal to 20, which it is in this case, total was over the limit. And just to be sure, we could actually do some output. We could put remainder is plus the remainder. So if we run that, just to clarify that we are getting the right results, remainder is 20 rather. My total was 2,500 and total was over the limit because we've successfully tested to see whether it's less than or equal to 20. And just in terms of operator precedence, you can see that it's now important that you understand operator precedence and why you need to make sure that you get that correct, and brackets do help a lot with that. And we'll be talking more about this in the course, but for now I want to leave you with a website that is very useful. So if we go and paste this in, and you'll see this link in the resources section, so you can go ahead and check it yourself. This is the precedence table, and you can see more information about how things work, and it can be really useful to try and figure out, when you're figuring out how these things work, how Java is looking at what you're typing in to make sure you're actually on the same page. And again, there's some information there that's quite useful to understand moving forward with your Java code. So again, the problem was the issue here in terms of precedence. You can see that the operator in brackets is the highest precedence in Java. So it looks at what's in brackets first. But going down the list, you can see here for precedence 12, multiplication, divide, and modulus, they've got a higher precedence than plus. And that's why in our sample code that I just showed you, and likewise for subtraction for that matter, that's why the code didn't work the way you expected it to, because it was doing the multiplication side of things first. Alright, so I'm going to end the video here now. I hope you enjoyed that. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about some of the keywords that form part of the Java language. So I'll see you in that video. In the previous video, we started our discussion about operators in Java. And in this video, we want to go through and finish off that discussion by introducing you to some additional operators. Now, in case you're wondering why the color on the screen has changed since the last video, the reason is that I'm re-recording this video. And that's because there were a couple of issues with the original recording. So hence it's an updated version of IntelliJ, and it's now done in this color because I'm doing that in the later parts of this course because it's proven to be better for the eyes in this particular color. Okay, so moving on. So if you recall, we actually finished off talking about the AND operator, and you can see an example of the AND operator on line 55, checking to see whether both conditions were true. So both what was on the left-hand side of the AND, the two ampersands, and also what's on the right-hand side, and we'd only get the output showing on line 56 if both conditions were actually true. Now, what I suggest you do is, in the case where you've got these two checks, these two conditions, it's a good idea to actually put a bracket around each set of conditions.